Daniela Venezia of DV Textiles, and I'm here today to present this tutorial called Getting Started with Color, a beginner's guide to tapestry flat weaves on the Olikraft loom. Color is one of the most powerful tools in tapestry weaving. It brings your designs to life, adds dimension, and tells a story with every shift and shade. In this tutorial, we will focus on simple but effective ways to introduce color into your weaving using flat weave techniques. Whether you're creating multicolored stripes or building graphic motifs with clean color joins, by the end of this tutorial, you'll learn practical skills that can be applied to any tapestry, no matter what your style. So let's get started. Here are the design principles and techniques that we will be discussing in this video. These timestamps will help you find each part whenever you need it. Before we jump straight away into color changes, however, I want to show you a simple way to replace your yarn from an empty shuttle without leaving tails hanging at the edges. If you run out of yarn on your shuttle sooner than expected, you can start and end the new yarn somewhere in the middle of the weaving. This way, both tails stay hidden at the back of the tapestry instead of sticking out along the sides. Here I weave only partway across the warp. Then I start my new shuttle at the same place I left off weaving the last one, letting both tails hang in the back. As you can see, one warp end will not seem woven at all, but that's okay. It will be covered on the next pass. Now that I've continued weaving, you can hardly tell I've had to change shuttles at all. You don't have to do it this way. Some people just let the tails hang off the sides and weave them in with a needle after taking the piece off the loom. But I prefer this method because it's tidier and keeps the edges clean as I go. It's a good technique to keep in mind for when you're changing colors for stripes. And now we'll talk about stripes. Although they represent the simplest of techniques, stripes have endless variety. Their personalities can range from neat and balanced to random and playful. Just by changing the width, spacing, and especially the colors, you can go from bold and graphic to soft and subtle. They show up in all kinds of styles, from traditional to modern, making them a great starting point for any weaver. The weaving itself is simple, but stripes open up a whole world of color play and creative variation. Basic stripes on a tapestry loom are horizontal and use shuttles loaded with different colors. Here I will be using brown and navy. One row of yarn only covers half of the warp ends, so do at least 2 rows per color to keep the lines crisp and intentional. Here's a tip. When working with multiple shuttles, try starting them from opposite sides. This helps make sure that the edge threads get wrapped, keeping the sides of your weaving, called the selvages, neat and tidy, not loose or messy. Now we will build up our stripes with 4 picks each. A pick is 1 row of yarn that goes across the loom. Each time you pass the weft from side to side, you're making 1 pick, and these picks build up the fabric. When changing shuttles, make sure that the edge warp is always caught as you weave. If you find yourself leaving the edge warp exposed, you can always go back and wrap the new shuttle yarn around the previous yarn to keep it in place. And there you have it, the beginning of the stripe pattern. A more subtle stripe technique that uses gradual color changes is ombre. An ombre is when one color slowly fades into another. It might go from light to dark, or for one color to a completely different one. This creates a soft, blended effect that almost looks like a wash of color across the weaving. Strié, by contrast, is a coloring technique that uses individual picks of color to create a stippled or streaky effect. Rather than blending smoothly, the colors are broken into small shifts that give the surface a textured, slightly irregular look. Both are subtle techniques, but where ombre feels fluid, strié adds depth through broken color. Now that you know these techniques, you can begin introducing them in stripe formations into your own weaving. Now we will demonstrate pick and pick. Pick and pick is a technique where instead of doing at least 2 passes per color, you alternate colors with every other pick. This allows color to build up in vertical striping as opposed to horizontal striping. It's simple, but a powerful visual technique often used in tapestries and rug weaving to create bold graphics or subtle color shifts. It works well with both high contrast yarns and more delicate variations. Let's take a look at how this is done. Here I've thrown the first pick of pink thread. Again, notice how I started it from the left and now I'm throwing the brown pick from the right, because when working with multiple shuttles, it's good to start them from opposite sides. Here's another tip. If the warp ends stick a bit when you change the shed, just bring the bar in slightly closer to you. It helps shake the yarns back into place. Always make sure that the edge weft is wrapped when you introduce a new color. You can simply pass it under the last thread to keep the edge tidy. Notice how the color changes are building up on every other warp thread, forming vertical columns of color. Even though you're weaving each row horizontally, the alternating colors stack on top of each other to create vertical stripes. This is a magical effect that can create striking visuals with strong graphic impact. Now that you've learned how to do horizontal stripes and vertical stripes, you can combine these techniques to create subtle and beautiful effects. By layering different types of stripes, you can build patterns that blend into each other, just like these beautiful ombre pick and picks that you see here. Or you can try using the pick and pick technique to add graphic accents to your stripes, just like you see here. Now that you know how these patterns are made, you'll start seeing them everywhere. You'll notice that your new weaving hobby trains your eye as well as your hand. As you practice, patterns and textures start to stand out in fabrics, in nature, in the built environment. Your hands might be weaving, but your eyes are learning how to design. Once you've mastered stripes, you'll naturally want to start shaping your designs. That's where midfield color joins come in. Midfield color joins allow us to do shapes like blocks, arches, and layered forms. These techniques let you play with color placement and contrast in new, fun ways. Even with simple weaves, you can create bold, modern looks or soft tonal effects depending on how you arrange your colors. However, unlike stripes, graphic motifs need more care when changing colors. If you don't anchor the yarns where the colors meet, you'll end up with gaps in the weaving, like in this example. Gaps are common in traditional weaves like those of kilim rugs, as shown here. But for a more modern, clean look, especially for a tapestry that might be hung and gap open, it's better to join the gaps while you're weaving. There are 2 main ways to join yarns cleanly: warp interlocking and weft interlocking. We'll walk through both methods so that you can choose the one that works best for your design. With warp interlocking, you choose one warp thread where the 2 weft yarns meet. This warp acts as a shared anchor. When you reach that point from either side, you loop or wrap each color around the same warp end before turning back. This creates a clean join between the two colors without leaving a gap. Notice how I'm using the shuttles here. Since the weaving area is small, I'm not passing the whole shuttle through. Instead, I treat the notch like a needle, using it to guide the yarn across. I work with short lengths of yarn because each yarn has to be pulled all the way through, which would be too bulky or slow with longer strands. Here I'll speed up the weaving. Always double check that both weft yarns are interlaced around the same warp thread. If it helps, you can mark that warp with a small dot of ink. Since it gets buried in the weave, the mark won't be visible in the final piece. Warp interlocking is especially helpful when you're weaving shapes that meet on a straight vertical or diagonal line. Just make sure to keep an even tension. If one color pulls tighter than the other, it can cause a slight shift or bulge in the fabric. In weft interlocking, two wefts yarns meet at the same warp point and twist around each other before continuing in opposite directions. This joins the colors together and closes any gap. Again, just be careful not to pull too tight or you'll get puckering where the yarns meet. If it helps, you can mark the spot where the wefts interlock by placing a small dot of ink on two adjoining warp threads. It's a helpful reminder that the color change happens in the space between the warps and not directly on either one. Although weft interlocking, like warp interlocking, gives you clean joins between the colors, it is also especially useful for creating subtle vertical color shifts. This comes into play with techniques like hatching, where two colors blend gradually along a shared edge to create soft transitions rather than hard lines. That brings us to the end of this tutorial on color changes in tapestry weaving. From simple stripes to interlocking techniques, you've now got a solid foundation for adding color and shape to your designs. I strongly encourage you to weave a sampler using just the techniques from this video. Each section can be a playground for ombre, strié, pick and pick, and interlocking joins. Remember, even small changes, like where you switch the yarns or how you anchor them, can make a big difference in the final look of your piece. So take your time, experiment, and enjoy the process.